Kessler Foundation and the University of New Hampshire present Hiring on Autopilot: How to Prepare Yourself and People with Disabilities for AI Employment Practices.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Hiring on Autopilot: How to Prepare Yourself and People with Disabilities for Artificial Intelligence Employment Practices. I'm Elaine Katz, Senior Vice President of Grants and Communications at Kessler Foundation. I'd like to thank the University of New Hampshire, our partners in the production of National Trends in Disability Employment Monthly Jobs Report, for providing our technical assistance for today's webinar. There are instructions currently on the screen to activate closed captioning and any sound changes. To select sound, you're going to select the speaker you want for today's webinar by clicking on the up arrow next to the audio settings and then select one of the options. For closed captioning, click on the closed caption and then select show subtitle or subtitles to view, or you can also select the view full transcript to get a running transcript of the captions. Next slide, please. In other upfront matters, we've spotlighted the ASL interpreter today for accessibility best practices, and there's 2 interpreters and they will be switching off during the webinar. For individuals who are using a computer and you want to see multiple speakers alongside the presentation, what you're going to do is go to view the side-by-side mode, hit view, usually it's in the right top corner, and select gallery view. Our webinar is being recorded and we'll post it later on kesslerfoundation.org. As an attendee of this website, you're a webinar, you're a viewer. So to ask Q&A questions, you're going to be using the Q&A box on your webinar screen. We'll be reviewing those questions, and the last segment of the webinar is being held for Q&A. If there's any further questions after the webinar, please contact us at kfgrantprogram@kesslerfoundation.org. That's kfgrantprogram@kesslerfoundation.org. Next slide, please. Again, welcome to our virtual symposium. I'm Elaine Katz, Senior Vice President of Grants and Communications at Kessler Foundation. I'm a white female. I have short brown hair. I'm wearing blue eyeglasses, a red jacket, a black shirt, and a colorful beaded necklace. Our virtual symposium began, as a lot of other initiatives did during COVID, because bringing together people for live events we couldn't do. So it's a unique opportunity for us to offer this virtual symposium and broadcast it to a national audience. Our work at Kessler Foundation changes the lives of people with disabilities through medical rehabilitation and funding initiatives for employment for people with disabilities. Our rehabilitation research seeks to improve cognition and mobility for individuals with disabilities such as stroke, spinal cord injury, traumatic brain injury, and multiple sclerosis. We also look to improve daily functioning independence by testing new interventions and gathering data that can be used in treatment. Our Center for Grant Making has invested close to $49 million over the past 13 years through our grant programs in New Jersey and nationally. Our targeted grant making has supported new business ventures, job creation, job development, in various sectors and businesses. But most importantly, we're the leading funder of innovative approaches that can affect systematic change by creating genuine economic opportunities for people with disabilities. Today's webinar is a continuation of our fall virtual program on the future of the work and influence of artificial intelligence on employment for people with disabilities. The robots are coming, as a recent article in New York Times proclaimed, which really highlighted white-collar jobs for college graduates in accounting. Recent advances in AI and machine learning has really been accelerating during COVID as businesses look to cut expenses. And what's the biggest chunk of all expenses? You might have guessed it: paying people or labor costs. So there's a real concern for the disability community and its allies to be alarmed as our society embraces AI for recruiting, hiring, and training practices. Although you may not be seeing or think you're not seeing the effects of AI in your community, large and small employers from Amazon to your neighborhood grocery are looking to and employing these technologies. We hope today's program better prepares you for the coming of AI by understanding the risks of this technology and how to enable people with different impairments to be recruited and placed on the basis of individual capability and potential. Next slide, please. I'm excited today to hear from our panel of experts, all known leaders and advocates in disability. I'd like to introduce Deborah Rue, our AI guide for today, who as moderator will lead you through a lively program in each of our speakers. Deborah, you can turn on your camera now. Deborah is a global inclusion strategist, market influencer, internationally recognized keynote speaker, published author and branding expert, successful entrepreneur, and exceptional mother. Deborah is host of a popular program, Human Potential at Work. She's also an author of 3 books, Inclusion Branding, Tapping into Hidden Capital, and Finding Your Voice during using social media. Deborah is a recognized global influencer, frequently interviewed by various media outlets, and has gathered a significant presence on many social platforms. With over 400,000 followers across all mediums of social media, Deborah is also a co-founder of the award-winning Access Chat, one of the world's largest tweet chats with over 8 billion tweets. Deborah, take it away.
Thank you so much, Elaine, and thank you so much for everybody that's joining us on this very important topic. I live in Virginia, and we are actually having problems with amounts of us with Wi-Fi. So I'm going to turn off my video during the event just to make sure that I can be as clear as possible. Next slide. As we're moving slides, as Elaine was asking me who were the right people to invite to be on this panel, I thought, wow, I know 3 brilliant people that are adding tremendous value to these conversations. So the first one of those is Heather Dowdy. Heather Dowdy currently leads the partner strategy for the Microsoft Artificial Intelligence for Accessibility program. Heather is responsible for nurturing the growing number of global partnerships with startups, researchers, and NGOs. Let me stop for a second and say, Heather, will you please turn on your camera too? I forgot to do that. Go back to the next slide. Thank you. There's Heather. Thank you. Welcome so much. Heather is also an engineer, very impressed with women that are engineers. So and I interrupted myself, but Heather is responsible for nurturing the growing number of global partnerships with startups, researchers, NGOs, and providing grants with resources to scale the impact of technology for people with disabilities. She has 15 years of experience developing and demonstrating accessible technology in mobile, web, and artificial intelligence. Heather Dowdy is passionate about connecting the dots across disability, race, and tech. As the oldest daughter of deaf parents, she is fluent in American Sign Language. She loves using the design thinking process to create solutions that empower marginalized communities and improve usability for everyone. She's a strong believer in empowering communities through education and Microsoft Camp board member of its code, providing STEM leadership training to high school students with disabilities. And thank you, Kate. I am turning off my video. Oh, goodness. And at the same time, Heather is also proud to be a mother. So Heather, welcome so much to the show today. And let me just give you time to introduce yourself briefly too.
Thank you, Deborah, and thank you, Kessler Foundation, for having me for such an important topic. I remember the panel back in the fall, and I was thinking, yes, that's the conversation I want to be a part of. And that's because I love talking about innovation. As Deborah described, I love to partner with the many innovators around the world at Microsoft with our AI for Accessibility program. And these innovators are leveraging AI in order to really empower people with disabilities. And so I could talk about innovation and the future of accessibility and AI all day.
Thank you, Heather. Our next panelist is Frances West, and we'll ask Frances to turn on her camera. I'm very proud to have worked for Frances West for a long time. Frances West is an internationally recognized thought leader, speaker, strategy advisor, and women in tech executive known for her work in innovation, technology, and business transformation. Her human-first approach to leadership and focus on digital inclusion comes from her journey as a first-generation, non-English speaking immigrant and her career as a technology executive, including IBM's first chief accessibility officer. And I think she was the first woman to be named as a chief accessibility officer too, which we were very proud of. Frances is an appointed faculty instructor at the University of Massachusetts Medical School and holds an honorary doctorate from the University of Massachusetts in Boston in recognition of her work in accessibility, research, and digital inclusion. She's the author of Authentic Inclusion and Drives Disruption Innovation, and her book is amazing, highly recommend it. And founder of Frances West Co., a global strategy advisor company focused on operationalizing inclusion as a business and technology imperative. I could not say that word today, Frances, but welcome to the program and tell us a little bit more about your work.
Well, thank you very much, Deborah, for that introduction. And thanks, Kessler Foundation, for bringing this incredible panel together. Deborah and I, and many of you have gone way back in many years. And I think all of us who are in the technology field, I feel this is the time when the technology and humanity has to come together. And today's topic really gives us a chance to look at this, one of the most interesting and also emerging technology that's going to affect us all. While it has a lot of challenges, but it also is at the beginning of a brand new technology that's full of promises. So I'm extremely honored to be on this panel, and also delighted that we'll be able to basically have a great session with some of the colleagues that I work with and have huge respect for. So thank you again.
Thank you, Frances. And certainly, last but not least, is my partner in crime from the United Kingdom. He's joining us from outside London, Neil Milliken. I'm very proud to partner with Neil on the award-winning and now verified by Twitter Access Chat. Neil is a global head of accessibility at AIs, an invited expert for the W3 Cognitive Accessibility Task Force, a member of the AIs scientific community, and an AIs distinguished expert. He is, as I mentioned, co-founder of Access Chat's, the world's largest tweet chat, I believe these days, with a focus on accessibility and inclusion. He's a member of the board of directors of the World Institute on Disability, and I am also proud to be on that board and an officer, and so is Frances. He's a non-exec chair of the board at Genius Within and a chair of the diversity board for the Institute of Coding. Neil was named in the top 10 of the Shaw Trust Disability Power List in 2018 and was named D&I Practitioner of the Year in 2019 Disability Smart Awards. He's really, really smart, and he's funny, and he's clever, and he is really changing the world. Those of you that might not be familiar with AIs is a multi-billion-dollar brand that's located in France, but they have employees all over the world, including over 10,000 employees here in the United States. So Neil, welcome to the program. Do you want to tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Thank you. Yeah, I obviously my head is now so large that I can't fit through the door. So yes, I work for AIs or AIs. We are a digital transformation outfit that do everything from landing space probes on comets for the European Space Agency, designing quantum computers, to delivering the Olympics and Paralympics, to the more mundane stuff like helping people with their day-to-day digital workplace experience, which is actually not that mundane, because that's where the rubber hits the road and that's where inclusion happens. So I'm delighted to be joined by joining you with Deborah and Frances and Heather, all people who I respect greatly, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion today.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Neil. So we're going to start, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask questions one at a time of the panelists. And if the other panelists want to respond also to the question, they can just let us know or ping me in chat. But we're going to start with Heather. So Heather, tell us about the biggest opportunities with accessibility within AI.
Thanks, Deborah. With AI, it's here, right? It's around us, whether that's speech recognition or translation or image recognition. But there's such an opportunity, I believe, to disrupt what has been when we look at accessibility and when we look at disability history, particularly because we're here to talk about employment. I mean, the unemployment rate for people with disabilities has been the same for 30 years. It is time to disrupt that. And AI presents an opportunity to do just that because it's technology that gives us options and flexibility. And so I'm really excited to think more about what solutions can come about that really can empower and support people with disabilities when it comes to AI. And when I think about disrupting, I think about an opportunity not just to create tech for being cool, but really to change the culture. One of my favorite projects to talk about within the AI for Accessibility program is a project by researchers at Vanderbilt University. And they are developing a virtual job coach for people living with autism to prepare for job interviews. And their virtual job coach can detect stress levels and eye gaze. And it's the job coach that actually adjusts the interview based on how the candidate is doing. And what that means is that it is us, the environment, that adjusts. So many times we talk about, well, the person with the disability should adjust, but here's an opportunity for technology to support and allow us to make the environment more accessible. And so I think that there are lots more opportunities to change what has been, and certainly to empower people with disabilities through AI.
Excellent, excellent points, Heather. Francis, I'm going to go to you next. I'm going to ask you a real easy question. How does AI affect the entire eco process beyond just recruiting? Okay, maybe it's not that easy, but I know you got this.
Yeah, so thank you for that question. And I totally agree with what Heather just said, that this is a time for huge disruption. And we have heard a lot of, frankly, not so pleasant or not so positive news about AI's impact on employment. In this case, we're talking about people with disabilities. But I can tell you that AI employment kind of bias issues exist for everybody. I mean, any underrepresented population. If you look at a latest, there was an article actually was published by AI Now Institute out of New York City. The whole 36 pages about how women are being discriminated against by AI. So the good news is that we are actually in this together, so to speak. That AI as a technology absolutely needs the community participation, which is a great thing, because historically, when you talk about technology innovation, usually is a few people, and in most cases, men in the garage or in the back office, and coming up with technology that changed the world. But AI, by the name of artificial intelligence, trying to mimic human, this is one technology all of us need to participate. So this is a great opportunity, all of us, and can play a role. But going back to your question specifically, there's AI actually being used in a very positive way today, and enabling people with disability to participate in employment. Just this morning, I tweeted about this a startup company called IRA, They use, a remote agent along with AI to, for example, to help people in the beginning. The application is to help people who are blind or low vision to navigate, to go shopping, to do things like that. But since then, IRA has started an employment initiative to help, for example, person to prepare for interviews, right? And also if some of the interviews involves testing. So again, using, remote agent plus AI, kind of a combination, using technology to assist a person with disability in the employment, in the interview process. So there are many actually aspects of the employment process, from identifying the job through a job board that AI can help to funnel, to filter, all the way to preparing for the employment, to actual employment and post-employment in the workplace. So I think when we talk about AI, we really should think in the entire ecosystem and understand where are some of the issues that we need to keep an eye on, but what are the places we can absolutely deploy AI to help with the productivity and also parity.
Excellent points, excellent points. And I want to bring in people I want to bring in the audience when possible. And we actually have a question. And so Neil, I'm going to ask you to come on, because this was a question I was going to ask Neil anyway. And I should have done it right at the beginning, so I apologize. But what specifically is AI? And then also she goes on to say, and what steps can we take to help to facilitate success for those we work with who have psychiatric disabilities? Now, Neil, you don't have to answer the last part of it until we can do that later, but we should really talk, what is AI?
Cool.
What are we even talking about here? And if you want to dig into the other part of the question, we can do that now, or we can do it later. Thank you.
Okay. Neil. So I think there are multiple different definitions of what constitutes artificial intelligence. And I remember we had an interview that we had for Access Chat with Joanna Bryson, who was on the Google's AI ethics committee that imploded. And she defined AI extremely broadly, which was essentially anything that humans had invented that enabled other humans to do stuff that they wouldn't be able to do before. So it was taking away the effort of doing something. So she even defined power steering as AI, because then it enabled people that weren't big and burly to be able to drive lorries. I think that most of us understand AI to be something different to that. We understand that it is built upon machine learning, and that really when we think about whether something's intelligent or not, and we're thinking of these virtual assistants, then that's actually becoming more human-like. It's not human, we're anthropomorphizing stuff, but essentially it's the collection of these different machine learning tools, the speech recognition, the text-to-speech, and the combination of them put together in a way that then becomes quasi-intelligent, and so that we have these rules-based systems that enable decision-making or processes to be carried out, and that they facilitate greater speed and greater efficiency. But as people have mentioned, with that speed and efficiency also comes risk, because those decision-making processes have been predicated on data, and those data sets contain innate historical bias. And that's one of the challenges that we have as practitioners in the space, is understanding the bias and trying to work to remove the bias. I think with particular for psychiatric disabilities, I'm not a specialist in psychiatric disabilities, but I have a background around cognitive accessibility, and there are definitely elements that can help simplify stuff. So IBM was one of the organizations that first created text simplification tools that used AI to remove the complexity out of text, which support people like myself with dyslexia. There are, as Francis has mentioned tools that are helping people with difficulties in the hiring process with their confidence. So I'll open it up for others at this point, because I don't feel necessarily qualified to talk about the psychiatric side of things.
I would just add one example of a psychiatric. I know that there was research using AI, analyzing a speech pattern, which, you know, one of the key technology outcome of AI is a lot of natural language processing. And like Neil says, semantic simplification is one of them, but recognition of pattern is another very strong attributes of artificial intelligence. In this case, there was some research being done on a speech pattern that can actually kind of predict the onset of schizophrenia. So that's one example of how AI is beginning to be deployed to help with psychiatric disability. Again, very early stage, but it looks promising.
I agree. There's a lot to be hopeful for. There's a lot of work being done, but there's a lot to do as well. So I'm going to come back to questions and answers in a minute. But Heather, let me ask you another question, because one thing that we definitely want to talk about is the current applications and how it is working right now with the recruiting and the HR and all those different things. So what are your thoughts going back to, what we're living with right now with COVID-19? What are your thoughts on how learnings from COVID-19 might influence the current and the future technology trends in employment that AI can help solve?
Yeah, there's so much that we're learning about COVID and the pandemic globally. I think that will certainly impact technology and the future of work for some time to come. I think that COVID has certainly highlighted that equality is not equity. We're all kind of lumped into this pandemic together, but yet there have certainly been inequities in health and in racial justice that have surfaced during this pandemic. When it comes to the workplace, there's certainly an opportunity to think about flexibility. The disability community has been asking for flexible options like remote work for quite some time. And with the pandemic, we've been able to see that it is possible. And there certainly are assistive technologies that can help to make working remotely more inclusive and accessible. When I think about being able to turn on captions for a meeting, being able to provide multiple inputs, not just using your voice, but chat and text. This again points to how well flexibility not only serves people with disabilities, but it serves us all, especially when living in such a time as the pandemic. I also want to point out, to the question earlier, before the pandemic, the mental health and mental health disabilities were the number one and growing disability in the world. And with the pandemic, screenings for anxiety and depression have increased almost like 400%, according to Mental Health America. There certainly is an opportunity for us to have a broader conversation about mental health and how technology can help. I'm really encouraged that researchers are starting to think about this in the innovation space. And we've certainly looked at some partners and projects that try to figure out exactly what's the intervention and support that could be delivered to the person with a mental health condition or disability at the right time. And so to Neil's point, that's where AI sort of shines, in the sense that it processes lots of data and can model a little bit of the future based on that. And certainly could help us in coming up with more solutions.
Well said, Heather. And the next question, I'm going to go to Neil. I'm going to dovetail off what Heather was saying. How can AI help recruiters make the hiring process more equitable and diverse, and certainly provide the best qualified candidates for the employers? But what about the candidate with disabilities as well from that perspective? And then I'm going to move to Francis. Thank you.
So I think that there is definitely a double-edged sword here, because there have been a lot of AI tools that have been designed to speed up the hiring process that haven't really thought that much about disabilities at all. They're saying that they're removing bias from the recruiting process, but they haven't thought about disability bias. So there is danger there. At the same time, there are tools that are positively impacting the opportunities for people to apply. So, for example, just when you change the language of the job description and the way that you describe what success looks like in a role, that doesn't require the standard way of describing. Must be able to stand for 8 hours, be a corporate commando, and all of this kind of stuff, which quite often is full of machismo. Removing that language, and we've been working within my own organization with an organization called Textio, removing that language, removing the sort of some of the gendered language and some of the descriptions around how we describe the roles and what we require from people, has had a marked impact upon who's applying for those jobs. Because if you describe a role in a very sort of macho way, requiring lots of physical effort it makes it sound unattractive. You're saying to some people, well, we expect you to behave in this certain way. Whereas actually, when you start using language that talks about outcomes rather than describing how you might do the role, then it changes stuff. But obviously, the process of writing job descriptions is long-winded. In an organization of ours where we've got 110,000 people, we've got lots of job descriptions. So one way to make that difference is to use AI to go through and literally crawl the job descriptions and suggest changes and make them. The other things that we can do are things like helping schedule, helping capture the information for people requiring adjustments, making sure that we do all of these things quickly, we capture all of this stuff. So I think that's a positive side. I do think that there are lots of other things that still need to be thought out, because where we're doing things like using computers to look at people's body language, we may be excluding large parts of the neurodivergent population who don't look at the camera in the same way, don't interact in the same way. Where we are doing timed tests, again, we may be making assumptions about people. And then also, when we're even combing through CVs, because we're using a lot of AI as an industry to comb through CVs, again, we may be picking up things like spelling mistakes and stuff like that, which actually may be irrelevant to the role that the person is carrying out, but we're discarding a candidate straight away. So I think that there is utility in these tools, but how we apply them really will determine what the impact is.
Agree. There's so much that we're still figuring out. Francis, I'm going to ask a question from one of the participants that goes it's very close to what I was going to ask you anyway. Joseph Riddle says, in hiring employment, how should we edit the likely biased data that the AI is learning from in order to assure AI decisions in the future are equitable?
Well, this is a very big question, right? So to edit out the bias, like Neil said, takes a combination of both of the thinking logic, whoever write the recruitment application, and also data sets that's being fed into the AI machine. And the data set could include just like example of keywords, and it does it have a kind of a intentional or unintentional bias toward that. So right now, a lot of these innovation actually occurs with a technology company. And this is one of those areas, like I mentioned earlier, there's an increasing awareness of voice and frankly, not just noise, but voice from the communities about how AI, bias against, actually any underrepresented population can just geometrically, impact and negative impact. So every technology company, especially the big ones, I know IBM, Microsoft, Google, everybody is actually re-examining their AI strategy, right? And there is a trust computing, there is fairness computing, there is ethical computing. So that is a good thing, which says that everybody's aware that we have to do a lot more than just pushing this technology out. But that does not stop, of course, a lot of the startup and trying to adapt or adopt AI technology and go to print, so to speak. So I think this is actually one area earlier we talked about. It's not just a technology company's responsibility and role in kind of shepherding AI to be fair. It really is a community's, everybody's role. When I say everybody, that means we have to really work with the government to make sure the policy actually has its legislative, kind of power, but then also as a community level or at the university level, academia has to come together and putting frankly, not just pressure, but a recommendation and serve up, for example, inclusion by design kind of methodology to these tech companies and involving real people with disabilities in this kind of use case design and testing of their applications. That's the only way you can step by step to either in the best case scenario actually prevent bias being built in. But if the bias building because the data set is not correct or comprehensive, then add to that data set. So it's not an easy question to answer because it really is, it has to be a holistic approach.
Agree. I'm gonna, there's two questions from and they're from the same person, and I'm gonna talk about that. Ramu Iyer, excuse me if I said that incorrectly, is asking two questions, but they're great questions. The recruiting process is now online and not person-centered. A majority of the intellectual and cognitive disability talent don't have a college degree. Supported employment agencies often target this talent pool for minimum wage jobs, janitorial, stocking, cleaning, with limited upward mobility. Is there an appetite for companies to invest in on-the-job training and apprenticeships for IDD talent, not just autism, to enable them to become knowledge workers and stay relevant? And that is a wonderful question on its own, but I also want to read the next question to the panelists, and y'all can decide by show of hands who wants to take these on. But there is no standards body to certify that ATS is ethical and has limited bias. Is there a need to whiten a resume? See a paper in Harvard Business Review. I just want to say that I was actually reading, is AI the enemy of diversity? And here is a quote. AI skeptics frequently roll out a 2018 story about Amazon, which scrapped an AI-driven hiring tool because it was making choices in favor of male applicants for software development positions. Because the algorithm was based on data from past success stories, the majority of whom were white and male, it gave lower scores to candidates with female attributes, such as those who have attended an all-women's college. So I just thought his point about whitening up a resume was interesting and funny and scary, but who wants to take this on? Because those are some big things, but okay, Neil, we will go with you. Thank
I'll
you.
take the first one. So because my organization is actually active in this space, so we are taking on placements and during COVID for supported placements under a government scheme in the UK called the Kickstart scheme, where we're supporting neurodivergent candidates to come in and work with us. And it's not just an autism hiring program, it's a wide range of different neurodivergent conditions. So we are doing this. We recognize that that the standard interview process doesn't work for everyone. I've had my fair share of bad interviews as one of those people that you would class as having an intellectual disability. So I fully support flexibility in the way that we assess and hire people, whether that be through job trials or through alternate means. And I think that there is no single solution to this, particularly with cognitive. Even within the cognitive accessibility community, the needs of different conditions conflict and contrast. So what may work for one group won't work for another. So having that flexibility, having that understanding that you may need to assess in multiple modalities is really important. But also just running these programs and making sure that you get people in the workplace where people can understand that there is value and that these people add to the life of the company, to the ideas of the company, that the perspectives that they bring are different, and that in itself is valuable, is a worthwhile effort. So I think that yes, we see the janitorial jobs, and I really am keen to find ways to move away from disability employment programs being at that low level. What we need to find is careers. What we need to be supporting is careers. And actually, then artificial intelligence, once you're through the door, through tools like speech recognition, which has supported me throughout my career. I wouldn't have got my MBA without speech recognition. Then it's useful. Then you can, have the assistants, the Cortanas of this world, the auto suggestions, all of the spell checking and the grammar checking, and all of this stuff helps you once you're through the door. But we've got to open the door in the first place, and the challenges with some of the innate biases and the reinforcement of company culture, because we've already defined success. Frances once said, I'm a 42L. We were at a conference and she described me as a 42L because I'm male of a certain height and probably of a certain chest size. You were being generous at the time. I've lost weight since. I probably do fit that jacket now. But essentially I fitted that white male mid-40s trope of what a leader should look like. And we need to be thinking that for really successful organizations, I do apologize, that essentially we need to be taking much greater care of making sure that we're diverse and that we have really go from the widest pool of people so that we get the widest talent, the widest perspectives. And that means that the AI data sets that we're training from now don't really cut it. So we're going to need to work to build better ones. And that means working in consultation and collaboration with the community.
Well said, well said. And
talking of the community, that was Caroline Casey ringing me.
Oh, well,
so another one of our pals.
Elaine actually also asked a question, made a comment in a message to me that sort of goes along with this: do we need to whiten our resumes? And I don't know if anybody wants to take that on, but I will say that I don't want us to whiten our resumes, but at the same time, it's important for us to get jobs. And so sometimes we have to understand the limitations of what we're working with. And right now, there is a lot of changes taking place. And I don't know, Frances and Heather, if y'all want to weigh in on that, or go ahead, Heather. And Frances looks like she does too as well. So Heather, let's go with you first and then Frances.
Definitely. I love the questions that are coming through. I mean, pipeline is important. And I think it sort of, both questions are related in the sense that I tend to say that tech is as biased as the people making it. And we really have to sort of shift the way that we look at bias to be more of a spectrum and figure out how to reduce it. If someone said, hey, your website is accessible, you would test that. You would have to test that in order to know that. And so I get wary of solutions that are like, yeah, this is going to absolutely be no bias. And I think that when it comes to the question about, resume and what has worked historically, it goes back to data, which Frances talked about. But the truth is there is what we consider a data desert when it comes to inclusive data sets that include people with disabilities. And so we will need organizations that can collect more data. We will also need practitioners at companies to really ask questions about the solutions, the AI solutions, and the decisions that are being made. If the AI system is set up to support the individual and decision making, it's important to ask questions in the form of, well, what data sets were included? We've started to talk about data sheets for data sets in the industry where you can sort of kind of dig in to see if the AI model the machine learning model was trained on an inclusive data set. And so there's a lot to be said here about the fact that, yeah, at the surface, AI is really great at modeling the future based on the past, based on history. And I think in order to change that, because history has not worked well for marginalized communities, including people with disabilities, then we're going to need to make sure that these data sets are inclusive and that we, the disability community, are involved in collecting that data and that there is transparency and accountability, also holding the value tension of balancing privacy.
Frances?
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I do want to say that the question earlier was about, do we need to widen the resume? There is actually beginning to have a movement to move away from the traditional concept of resume. I can point to the example, in this case, IBM, a former chief executive officer, Gina Rometty, actually started this movement called the New Collar Initiative. So historically, we have white collar jobs, blue collar jobs, but now there's this new concept of new collar job, meaning you don't have to have a college degree. The focus instead is on your abilities, right? And this is actually one thing that AI, as over time, can help, because like Neil and Heather says, AI is good in processing large amount of data. And as we go further and further into the future, we can begin to categorize people's abilities versus the resumes. And one can imagine that in a world not so distant from future, that we will be able to match the person's ability with the jobs and vice versa. And we're already seeing some inkling or beginning of that. There is this employment company, a new company called Inclusively, using artificial intelligence as a kind of backbone, understanding, in this case, focus on people with disabilities, employment, understand what their abilities are, and also what their, instead of calling accommodation, they call it success factors, or success enablers, to mix it up so that they can present to the hiring companies a different kind of a profile or narratives than, say, in the past. So again, that's why I'm actually very bullish about AI, because it is an area where we can actually change some of the old thinking, like resume, because many of you probably know the university actually are throwing away SAT tests now, right? ACT, I think Harvard next year, the admission does not look at SAT as a standard test. And we know that a lot of time people with disability are not in the bell curve in the standard. In my way of thinking, they're actually edge worker, edge thinkers, because they're unique and they're actually different. So these are just a couple of examples of, I think, the trend of technology and also the trend of employment as a stance is beginning to change. And potentially, if we harness the power of thinking here and also participation of the strong disability community, then we have a change. We have a real good chance to really shape the future differently.
Well said, Francis. Elaine asked, and this is a great question, how come people with disabilities involved in helping with these database issues, making sure that, our voices are being heard? And I will start that. And I know that there's a lot of different efforts happening all over the world where people are trying to make sure we're included in these data sets. But I wanted to turn it over to the panel to see if you had any specific things that you wanted to address with that question or comment.
It's certainly an opportunity for community partners to help in serving the disability community and collecting this data. Again, it's important to really be principled in doing so, because we have to balance privacy, but also be transparent that we are creating inclusive and diverse data sets. When I think some folks are more comfortable self-disclosing their disability to an NGO, a nonprofit organization, over the government, because there could be implications. And so being very clear about how that data is being used and the benefits of making these inclusive data sets is important. But I do think that there's an opportunity for community partners to get involved, and certainly companies are looking at it and how we address it with the products that people are using, and really giving people the opportunity to opt in on whether or not they want to share and make those solutions better.
Well said, well said. Neil, do you mind answering the question that an anonymous attendee sent, because it certainly, I think, was partially from what you said.
Sure.
Many people I know have serious challenges with using speech to text features because of their enunciation, pronunciation, and or accents that are unintelligible to the software. It's disheartening because a possible tool for accessibility is not actually working for some populations. Any tips or suggestions?
Yes. Okay. So there's multiple layers to unpack here. So firstly, speech recognition has been around for a long time, but it's getting better exponentially and fast. At the same time, there are still challenges, particularly for people with speech impediments, particularly for people with strong accents. So, for example, my wife is not a native English speaker. She's from Southeast Asia. She dictates all the time in her own language, and it's fine. But when she tries to talk to Siri, she complains that Siri is both racist and sexist because it only responds to me. So I can tell Siri what to do, and Siri will behave, but it won't for her. So, and that's because it's not recognizing it. She's falling outside of what it's recognizing as the accepted models of speech. There is work underway for all of the main voice assistants to be looking at non-standard speech models to improve this. So speech from the deaf and hard of hearing community, speech for people for non-native speakers. So this is happening. I hate to say be patient, because I wouldn't be patient if I was in your position either, but it will improve. And I think that what we've seen is that where machine learning is really good is the more data it gets, the quicker it learns. So keep shouting at the smart assistants, keep trying to correct them, don't get disheartened. I spent a very tough few hours outside of Glasgow in Scotland one time, teaching a bunch of people with extremely thick Scottish accents to use speech recognition software. We got there in the end, but it required training. And with the automated systems, that training doesn't happen over immediately. It gets sent back, and only if you actually allow it to have the data. So then there's another issue, which is trust. Do you trust the big corporations enough with your data that they're not going to be listening to you, they're not going to be identifying you, to enable them to take that and learn from it? So it's a real question of sort of what do you give and what do you take back.
Well said, well said. Heather, I want to ask you the next question, and it's Dirkani Hawk, which once again probably butchered your name, I apologize, but I'm still learning about AI. Will the AI have the ability to work as an ASL interpreter at the deaf person's job interview site?
Ooh, good question, right? The deaf community wants to know. And we are a long ways off from that, very much so because of the need for more data sets with sign language. And I'll also say that certainly the approach is not to replace sign language interpreters, but I like to think of AI as putting the super in human. It is, how do we complement them? How do we make it easier for them to do their job so that perhaps they are doing something else? And so one way in which we're looking at that is a project at RIT, the National Technical Institute for the Deaf. And they are looking at sort of a hybrid caption model. So traditionally at universities, you might have a captioner that's typing during the class. And then there's an AI solution that is automatically picking up speech recognition. And so there's this solution where they're trying to bring both of those together, the human captioner and the AI solution, so that by you leveraging some of the automatic captions, then the captioner is able to then just spend time on correcting the mistakes and making sure that that data set improves and that solution improves. And so I just say that to say that really the focus is on how to complement our jobs and how to make it easier for us. Well said, well said.
Francis, the next question. I have my own questions, but we're getting such great questions from the audience. I want to make sure we can get to all of them. But Tracy Powell-Rudy made she made some great points and asked a question. As is the case with any technology, it can be used well or abused. Voicemail, for example, you can hide behind it or may provide timely and informed responses easier. We integrate autism employment advisors. Have been working with HireVue, an on-demand AI-based interview platform, to ensure that it is autism friendly. I think the real issue is ensuring that we, the individuals with disabilities and their advocates, have representation at the development level. Companies creating these new solutions need to be testing these platforms with these various populations, which others have said. As an extension of what Heather said, how can each of us and you facilitate more representation at the level? Can we create individuals with disabilities or Kessler seal of approval, like the Good Housekeeping Seal or Underwriters Lab, that ensures this occurs?
Well, this question actually get to the essence of my actually being right now. Many of you, or some of you may know that I've been really focusing on trying to really help, for example, the AI, the application of AI is actually coming out of the startup, right? I mean, you have tech company that create the AI platform, but the usage of AI technology to create, whether it's healthcare solutions or employment solution like applicant tracking system, is actually in this kind of a startup world. So you're absolutely right that collectively as a community, if we can begin to really educate the entire ecosystem, from innovation, from incubation to innovation to design to development to deployment, the entire process, and making sure that people with disabilities, both their point of view and also their needs articulated in the technology function and feature is integrated. Right now, we really don't have that process. And AI, the entire AI world, if you read any business article, tons and tons of investment. We're talking about billions, right? Not millions, billions of dollars. And the faster the startup goes, if we are not in there, the faster the geometric negative impacts are going to occur. So I think there is work to be done in integrating, but from integrating a people with disabilities mindset, understanding, and also the process into the current quote unquote development. When I say development, I actually mean the entire ecosystem, especially in the startup, because they are the one that creating these solutions that affect all of us on a day-to-day basis. So it's a great question.
I agree.
So
I agree.
you guys are having so much fun. I'm just going to jump in here because we're getting towards the end. And, I'm always the practical person. And I just wanted to kind of ask a question for some of the people who are actually working out there as agencies. So if I take somebody to a job interview site, and first they have to fill out an online application and it times out. And then I find I can't get through the system because that person cannot get that application. What do I do? How do I help that person who I'm trying to get employed get through that system? What are some of the steps I can take?
I'll just chime in and say that really sitting back and looking at how to design the user experience from end to end is not new to AI, but it's just still very cornerstone to really building accessible experiences. And I think that in the case of really providing just access, from the get-go, it's important to give multiple modes of input. AI has shown us that we can do that. You can definitely, provide it via text or voice or image recognition of a form. There are so many other ways. And so building in the flexibility and making sure that you look at the end-to-end experience, particularly in the mindset of including people with disabilities and thinking through how a person with various disabilities might go through that experience is still really key.
Neil, were you going to say something?
Well, Heather actually said it for me, which was to make sure there are multiple modalities, because that's what we do right now. Is we recognize that not everyone will cope with our standard process, so we make it clear that they are welcome to phone us, email us, get in contact through whichever means if they're interested, and we will find a flexible way to ensure that they can apply. And it's about signaling that, because we're not going to be able to put every single flexible way online. What we can do is make it clear that we are willing to listen to candidates and accommodate them, and find a way for them to apply, and make sure that is clear, and in every time we advertise, make sure that people know that.
Well, there's a lot of questions in our chat box. I'm going to throw a few out there too. There's been a lot of questions on speech, because I think that's the one that most people are familiar with now. So there's one from one of the attendees that if a neurodivergent person who has benefited from scripting and has a monotonic speech or robotic speech goes through job interview coaching and AI, is there a discussion around how to make sure that person doesn't come out of the experience sounding or looking more robotic? Which is a really good question. If you're looking at training through AI, what is that, how does that person take away something that's more natural? I guess that's really the question. Somebody want to take a shot at that one?
Neil?
No, I think that's a really tough question. I don't think we're there yet. I honestly don't think we're there yet. I think that the AI is limited in terms of what it can recognize, and therefore it's still looking for patterns. So and if it's looking for patterns and it's trying to coach you to behave in a certain way, and you struggle, and therefore you're sort of overemphasizing and you're masking, because that's quite common. People have to feel that they have to mask in order to get through and look neurotypical in the interviews, that they may overdo it, and that the AI may not recognize that. And I think that that's still a danger, because it's that masking may look to AI like it's the behavior that it's looking for, when actually it's kind of overdone and people are going through the motions, and the human will probably recognize it as being slightly strange, whereas actually you'd probably be better off being your normal, your day-to-day self. So whatever you are on a day-to-day basis, if you have slightly monotonic speech, that's fine. Actually, what we're looking for, or what one hopes employers are looking for, are your abilities to do the job that we have advertised. We far too frequently select for people that are good at interviews and not good at the jobs that we need them to do. Mm-hmm. And so actually focusing on what we require the candidate to do and the skills, and getting them to prove that, is more important than the way that they deliver their answers.
Yeah, using skills is really, I think, where even funders are looking at when they look at programs in the field, because it incorporates all those people who may not have degree work, but have life experiences or lived experiences that can really do the job. There's one topic that we're getting in our Q&A that we really haven't touched on at all today, which is the psychological and personality tests that are used through AI as screeners and companies, which Neil's making a face. I'm sure it's not a favorite of people on this call, but Francis, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, I think the personality, all these intangible attributes, it is the ultimate challenge of AI, right? Because now you're talking about something you cannot, logically put a binary decision, yes or no, gone to college or not, but it's this very gray zone. There are companies out there doing the unconscious bias study, for example, matching the facial recognition of for example, tilting your eyes or the angle of the body. They can derive certain conclusions or indication whether there is a biases or not in the relationship of a discussion. So I think, again, this is one of those areas that it will become more and more mature, and the Myers-Briggs kind of a personality test kind of a data set is being quote unquote studied and then absorbed. But is it at a level where it really can call industrial strength, or has it gone through the testing? I don't think so. But that's another reason why this kind of discussion is important. So, because we're still at the I always say that AI is like an infant stage right now. It really doesn't know much yet. So the good news, we still have a chance to influence. But there's a lot of hard work ahead of us too.
Does anybody else want to comment, Neil?
Yeah, so I'm still a real skeptic about some of these things. So my pal, Dr. Nancy Doyle, calls Myers-Briggs the astrology of business. So it's what star sign are you? Oh, I'm ENFP. Or I am INTJ. I think that there needs to be more science behind some of these business personality types too, because what we're doing is we're applying business theory, which may not actually have that much science behind it, and then putting prescriptive analytics on top of it. So we're we're then automating something that's not very scientific in the first place. And that's dangerous, because then we're making assumptions about people and about their capabilities. So I think that there's real potential, but there's also, you know, a lot of work still to be done, and a lot of work on the basic fundamentals, and we need to get the fundamentals right, because the actual processes and the application of AI is not that difficult. We know how to do that. It's the ethics and the science and the research to create the right data set so that we can take the right decisions.
There's another interesting question. We really have time maybe for one or two more. And this is asked by Richard. Given the advancements of AI and the understanding of different data sets available, has the HR industry, so has human resources, been a gatekeeper to the older methods, or is that industry now embracing all these new advancements on AI and also putting less weight on CVs and college degrees?
I can take a shot at it. I mean, if you look up, there is a group called Hacking HR. It's a group of HR really wanting to use data as their baseline of HR thinking. And so from that standpoint, there is an emerging, a new breed of HR that actually embracing the technology head on and understand that HR function is not a support function, but a lead function. And like, you know, Neil just said, by the way, in terms of personality, I think the skill sets of the work of the future in terms of a leadership is so different and actually play to the advantage of people with disabilities, because it's a creativity, it's collaboration, you know, and like Deborah's connecting, you know, different dots. So I think from that standpoint, again, I'm an optimist. I think, you know, the people with disability communities and just the way they operate and think has huge potential kind of leg up, so to speak, in the future work scenario.
Heather, do you want to add something?
Yeah, this is such a good conversation. And as you said, we could continue to go on because we all work together. But I love how my colleagues just brought it back to culture. We can't expect technology just to fix everything for us. There are some things that we really have to sit down and think about, like, why do we want that particular outcome? Why are we using personality tests? What is the outcome? Is there another way to do it that is more equitable? And so that's just the challenge that I have for everyone, that yes, AI is emerging and there are great benefits, but that doesn't take away from the work that we need to do to really understand how to use it responsibly and why we need to use it. Using AI to make a decision for us and, you know, make automated decisions, maybe that's not the best use of it. Perhaps helping us to make decisions, informed decisions, hey, there's opportunity there.
So with that comment, Heather, that really sets us for really the last question we have time for, which is, in an agile team building consumable software, there's great opportunity. So there's great opportunity really for people with intellectual disabilities and other disabilities to be testers of some of these systems. How can they get involved in doing that? How do they know what's going on? Or is there open calls, for example, for people to kind of test the software within agencies or job candidates? How do people get involved?
Yes, there are always beta rings. Nothing is finished the first cycle. And so please include people with disabilities to test. People with disabilities, Neil said, be patient. I said, get involved.
So how do they get involved? That's the question. How do they get involved?
Yeah, there's definitely lots of beta releases in the market, whether that's app or whether that's within testing within a company, for sure.
Mm-hmm. And how do you hear about that? If you're, I mean, if I'm just sitting in New Jersey and working, doing my daily job, and I'm either a person with a disability or work with disabilities or have people with disabilities, my families, how do I hear about those opportunities? Do the companies put out, you know, notices that they're looking for testers?
I'm seeing it on social media. I'm seeing requests on social media. I don't know about the rest of you. Go ahead, Heather.
And I will also say that your universities, I mean, because this is such a new technology, a lot of companies, private sectors are actually going in collaboration with universities everywhere. So So check out your local university and see if they're doing anything, and then actually, involve yourself in some of their projects. That's, to me, that actually is the best way to get started. And then go to your local, a lot of the cities now have these innovation hubs, right? Incubators, accelerators. They actually have special track for AI.
Great.
There are also community forums as well. We're no stranger to giving our feedback when something isn't working, and then you get tapped to test the next thing or to test the improvement. So continue to give feedback on products.
Well, we have just about a minute left. I'd like to give everybody just a 30-second wrap up. So let's just start with Heather. Just wrap up kind of your last thoughts.
Get involved. Inclusive data sets are really key, given that AI runs on lots and lots of data. And so inclusive data sets means that we're including people with disabilities. And when designing AI solutions and implementing them, particularly in the employment space, think about flexibility, personalization, but also the outcomes. What are the outcomes? Why are you using that technology? And is that the best use of the technology?
Neil, what would you like to add?
So I talked a lot about science, but we also need sociologists and historians building tech, because these people understand what's gone before, and they inform our understanding of the data sets and the understanding of the biases and the potential challenges that we might face. So they can help us predict some of the things that might happen.
Great. And Francis?
I would just say that AI actually needs your help, right? I mean, as technology gets more human needs to get human. We should use every opportunity, like university access and social media, like Clubhouse. I just noticed it's a new social media forum that, of course, is not accessible to people who are deaf. But anyway, the social media forum creates a community voice that is absolutely needed. So again, this is a kind of opportunity that we can shape the future.
Deborah, another really quick wrap up?
Well, I would just say, I know that I'm working on something some of y'all know about that's really going to pull the community together so our voices can be more heard. So I think anything that we can do to help each other be heard and make sure that we're opening the door wide behind others and we're bringing in more diverse conversations, I think it adds value to this. And thank you, Elaine and Kessler, for your leadership. I like that seal of approval they suggested, Elaine. Why don't you answer that?
That's a good idea. Oh, notice I avoided that right now. But I want to thank you all for all, Heather and Francis and Neil and Deborah, for all your expertise and information today. It was great to have you, and go forward with strength. Talk to you soon. Thank you all for joining us today.
For more information about the symposium or past symposiums, go to kesslerfoundation.org/2021 symposium.